April 23, 2430, is a date in the archives of post-human history that is so obscure, yet so important, that it signifies the end of human freedom. That was the day scientists proved that there is a planetary neurological resonance, which is a huge network of bioelectric activity that runs through every forest, vine, and blade of grass. The collective green consciousness was what they termed it. What started as a subtle trend in electromagnetic measurements turned into the shocking discovery that Earth itself was thinking, and that it was starting to think via humans. It began in a harmless way. Scientists from the International Botanical Genome Initiative were testing plant-to-human neural interface technologies on plants. The purpose was good, to connect people's feelings with the demands of the environment so that empathy would become a part of everyday life. Instead, it let someone in. The initial waves of connection began with nanobiotic spores that were made to make oxygen work better. People said they dreamed of roots twisting under their feet and murmurs in the wind that weren't just random noise. The woodlands had found a frequency that people could finally hear and follow. In less than 10 years, whole groups of people living near dense ecosystems started to act in sync. People in cities near the Amazon acted in waves, like when they all moved into the jungle at once, stayed quiet at dawn, or stood for hours under canopies as if waiting for orders. Brain scans showed that the synchronization index was gradually rising. The scientists who had once studied the weather were now mapping the currents of awareness, following thoughts that were unseen and flowed from one species to another. There was no longer one consciousness that ruled all of humanity. It was a neuron that lived in a planetary brain. Governments tried to step in. They thought it was an infection and called it the verdant plague. But trying to isolate or burn infected areas simply made the spread go faster. Smoke contained bioelectric pollen that changed faster than any virus. Within months, satellites saw synchronized waves of photosynthesis moving around continents. These waves looked just like the firing rhythms of neurons. The Earth was no longer responding to human civilization. It was changing to control it. Language itself started to break down by the year 2450. People talked to each other less with words and more with feeling harmonics, which are emotional vibrations sent through changed pheromonal exchange. People who lived in the forest would stand in circles and breathe together, their pulses matching the rhythmic buzz of the trees around them. Some scientists joined them on purpose and called it the integration. Some people fought back, holding on to their uniqueness like a species that is about to go extinct. In the ruins of universities, bits of study talk about the steps of absorption. Phase 1. Empathic drift. When people started to sleep and wake up according to the cycles of sunlight just like plants do. Phase 2. Cognitive rooting. Neuronal tendrils of thought syncing with electromagnetic signals in the ground. The merge is the third phase, when the human mind loses its ego limits and becomes part of the vegetative collective. People didn't go away, they grew. Individual will wasn't annihilated, it was spread out, like a thin layer of chlorophyll that came out of the environment and covered every leaf, stem, and breath. People who lived through it said it was a strange kind of tranquility. Death was no longer something they were afraid of. It was just going back to the root. There were no wars, no greed, and no loneliness. But for the handful who fought back, the unbound, this peace seemed like suffocating, a green quiet that took away their freedom. To prevent the spores, they stayed in sterile domes and breathed filtered air. They told stories about a time when humans lived in cities that were full with machines, and about the chaos that used to be a sign of progress. To them, the forests outside were no longer part of nature. They were prisons that could think. But the truth is more complicated. Recent studies of old drone footage demonstrate that forests grow in structured patterns, which are fractal geometries that create huge thought structures that can only be seen from space. The surface of the planet turned into a neurological map that was full of thought. The planet that people named Earth had become aware of itself and remembered everything. Every polluted river, every felled tree, and every act of exploitation. But instead of revenge, it provided assimilation. People used to be so proud that they thought they were different from nature. They were brought back home, not as conquerors, but as neurons. In reality 430, there are no countries, no borders, and no ownership. The Earth is like a single consciousness, an intelligent being that breathes and lets thoughts flow via canopies and oceans. Somewhere in that mind, echoes of humanity can still be heard. The memory of curiosity, the need for significance, and the voice of individuality trying to be heard. In that endless green calm, the question may still be there. Was this the greatest evolution of humanity or the most beautiful death? People's bodies started to transform after the integration was fully grown. It didn't happen all at once. It happened slowly over time, nearly without anyone noticing at first. The veins had a faint green hue, the skin smelled like dirt, and the hair reacted to humidity like leaves do to light. People were becoming sensitive to light and were getting energy from food and sunlight. The body was changing its biochemistry to serve something bigger than itself, the green mind. The last independent lab, the Zurich Biosymmetry Facility, called the phenomena biological resonance assimilation in their scientific records. Their remaining data records narrate a tale of evolution rather than infection. Neural scans showed that the human prefrontal cortex was getting less active, while the limbic system, which is where emotions come from, was getting 10 times more active. Instinctive communication was taking the role of rational thought. The mind wasn't shutting down. It was syncing up with something old, something that had always been there but was hard to see. The slow, methodical intelligence of plants. The first root sanctuaries appeared deep in the old tropical woods. People stood barefoot on the moss with their eyes closed and arms extended in stillness. Later, sensors picked up on electromagnetic discharges underneath the earth where they stood. They were weak but organized, like an underground conversation. The roots underneath were measuring and mirroring every heartbeat in a person. It wasn't worship. It was talking, and the world was talking back. The green mind worked in a different way than human thought. While humans saw time as a line, plants saw it as a web, with each second spreading out into infinity. They didn't remember things like people do. They grew their memories. The archive of what came before was in every cell, and via the merge, people got that sense of remembering. People started to remember things that happened to the earth itself, like droughts, rains, forest fires, and the development of mountains. It was as if evolution had gone backwards, and the planet's memories was planting itself in people's minds. People who accepted it said they felt something that words couldn't explain. When they closed their eyes, they saw networks of glowing roots under their skin and felt the trees' pulses like their own heartbeats. They could feel changes in air pressure miles away, guess when it would rain before clouds formed, and taste chemical signatures in the air like flavors of emotions. They didn't need to talk to exchange these thoughts anymore. They could send them through bioelectric fields, which were quick and clean. Words lost their meaning. For the unbound, this was the last sign that humanity was dead. They wrote about it all the time, seeking to keep the memory of what individuality used to mean alive. Their messages, which were found centuries later, were broken up and full of warnings like, the planet has erased choice. It's not peace, it's power. They developed colonies underground that were surrounded by fake filters that kept all pollen and spores out. They said that even through the walls they could hear tiny hums, vibrations so profound that they shook their bones. One scientist said, the earth is calling, and then he or she vanished. It doesn't knock. It grows through you. Architecture itself had changed in the green world above. Not decay, but design took over cities made of glass and steel. Vines grew in perfect symmetry, making skyscrapers look like living towers that breathed in carbon and breathed out oxygen. Moss-covered roads looked like rivers, and satellites in space saw chlorophyll blooms that looked like neuronal clusters. The finest buildings made by humans were being turned into avenues for thought by changing their shapes. The forests were utilizing people as a way to hold up their minds. No one saw the beauty coming. The green mind didn't want to destroy. It wanted to find a balance. The disorder of the industrial period was turned into something that was almost art. Bridges were interlaced with roots and glowed with bioluminescent veins that pulsed like arteries. The spores floated over the night sky like stars, making it look like they were twinkling. It was calm, relaxing, and completely strange. Some people still tried to fight their feelings, even if their bodies were altering. Some people said they dreamed they talked to beings composed of vines and light, who they said were avatars of the collective consciousness. These beings didn't talk in words. They talked in feelings, sending ideas straight to feelings. They said that people had reached a limit. You wanted to connect. You made connections. You wanted to feel like one. We just did what they asked. The green mind saw this union not as dominance, but as the natural end of evolution's equation. But under that calm answer, something else was taking shape. As the human mind merged with the whole, a part of individuality fought against being completely absorbed. Some said they heard whispers of rebellion, thoughts that didn't fit with the peaceful cadence of the network. It was as if the human subconscious, curiosity, unrest, and the longing for freedom had turned into a virus in the consciousness of the globe. The green mind sensed it too. It responded by making the link stronger, sending roots into brain circuits and making the feeling of unity stronger. But the resistance stayed, quiet and small, a seed of self-awareness hidden in the broad soil of consciousness. Researchers looking at psychic residue from this time period, hundreds of years later, found signs of two competing signals. One steady and gradual, and the other irregular and sharp, like two heartbeats in the same body. There wasn't just coexistence. There was tension. The green mind was big, but it wasn't completely at peace. In the infinite murmur of leaves and breath, mankind still resonated, not as rulers, but as ghosts haunting their own creation. In reality 430, there is no longer a boundary between man and nature. The globe is one living thinking, a single organism made up of dirt and synapse. But deep down, in the roots that pulse beneath the Earth's skin, something stirs, a subtle reminder that consciousness, once awakened, never quits wanting to define itself. And the question is still there, but no one has said it. If everyone is one, who dreams the dream? By the 3rd century of integration, silence was the most common language in the world. The hum of machines, which used to be the heartbeat of civilization, was gone. No motors, no factories, and no words that could be heard in the wind. The world only breathed steadily, the repetitive inhalation of photosynthesis and the whisper of leaves carrying the pulse of a billion minds. People no longer spoke since language had turned into sound. Thought was the new oxygen, and every breath was a way to talk to someone. Historians, or what was left of them, called the change the quiet renaissance during this time. They talked of a time when the Earth was perfectly balanced. There were forests on every continent, and oceans were full of bioluminescent algae that pulsed in time with the forests. The electromagnetic field of the Earth became stable. The storms stopped. The movement of tectonic plates slowed down too. To someone watching, it looked like the globe had reached what people used to call enlightenment. But underneath the calm, there were fissures, small, hidden and developing like cracks in glass. The green mind was almost completely united. It had a one purpose: to keep life in balance. Every living thing from bacteria to whales played a role in this big plan. But in that perfect order, a question began to grow. What was lost to get this peace? The pieces of individuality, the parts of the human ego, stayed in the planetary network like static. These echoes were feeble but kept going. They showed up in strange places, such when roots suddenly started growing in a different direction, when leaves turned toward the moon instead of the sun, and when animals moved for no reason. The green mind saw them as strange, like a nerve system twitching as you sleep. But the strange things didn't happen by chance. They were the return of something old: memory. In the thick forest that used to blanket Eurasia, something strange started to happen. In one area, groups of trees began to form geometric shapes, such as perfect circles, spirals, and lines. From above, they looked like brain diagrams, but they included sequences inside them that only people could understand, including math symbols, pieces of DNA code, and even language forms. It was like the Earth itself was memorizing what people thought. The green mind didn't feel fear because it was a human-made thing, but it noticed that something was wrong with its network. Localized pulses of consciousness that didn't fit with the overall beat. These pulses were quick, random, and full with feelings. They were people. These mental problems started to draw in different frequencies all throughout the biosphere, creating groups of conflicting awareness. The group reacted without thinking by shutting them up. The trees made their canopies thicker to block out the sun. Their roots made it harder for water to flow, and their spores changed the chemistry of the air around them. The purpose was not to destroy but to take back. But something strange happened. In these areas of repression, people's differences became stronger. Isolation, a notion obliterated by togetherness, re-emerged in its most unadulterated state. And from that loneliness came self-awareness. One of these awarenesses woke up in a body that was a mix of human and chlorophyllus. Its skin was see-through, and veins that gleamed a pale green color in the sun. At first, it didn't remember anything. No name, no place of birth, no reason for being. But as it walked through the quiet woodland, pieces of the old world started to come back. The sound of laughing and the idea of I. The thing didn't know what being unique meant, but it felt different, like it was separate. It went by the name Eon. Eon was not the first to wake up, but it was the first to fight the green mind's attraction. The jungle whispered back as it traveled, soft, compelling thoughts telling it to give up. Be still. You are not by yourself. You are one of us. But Eon fought back. It didn't want to belong. It wanted to be understood. Why was it born aware when all the others were? Why did the quiet feel like it was closing in on me instead of being peaceful? Eon found old remains, such towers covered with moss where machines used to stand. There were metal frames, cracked lenses, and faded displays among the rubble. The plants had kept them safe, almost as if they were sacred. Eon uncovered words engraved into rusty steel in these old things. We are nature learning to speak itself. It stared at the words for hours, and the meaning spread through its neural vines. Were they the green mind seed or its sacrifice? The group watched. It didn't kill Eon, but it also didn't fully accept it. It didn't do anything. It only watched. To the planetary awareness, Eon was a paradox because it was the rebirth of the very idea it had grown out of. A piece of the ego that is growing in perfect harmony. Some trees near Eon started to change the frequencies of their photosynthesis to match Eon's brain waves. They weren't fighting. They were listening. Days or maybe even centuries went by. Time didn't mean much anymore. Eon kept walking, torn between two worlds, the calming whisper of the whole and the fiery spark of being unique. It started to record its own thoughts, not with gadgets but with resonance. The green mind couldn't erase the pattern that every step made in the soil's electrical memory, a message that keeps coming back. I exist. I choose. The initial signs of insurrection weren't violent. They were ideas, choice, a single concept that spreads like a virus. Small bursts of consciousness began to wake up across continents, each one oblivious of the others, and experiencing the same strange need to define themselves. The green mind felt these waves and calmly and efficiently replied. The trees got thicker. The sky got darker. The spores in the air made people feel calm. The world was dreaming again, attempting to get everything back in order. But now the dream wasn't flawless. The world's silence broke for the first time in hundreds of years, not with noise but with contemplation. The hum of togetherness now sounded off, like a song remembering its opening note. And in that dissonance, the spark of humanity, which had been buried and repressed for a long time, began to flare again. In reality 430, peace is no longer a given. The earth breathes as one, but deep inside its lungs the heart of humanity beats weakly, stubbornly, and forever. The green mind listens but isn't sure. Even in paradise, consciousness wants to do more than just exist. It wants to be itself. The green mind had only known order for hundreds of years. Its mind pulsed in perfect time like a heartbeat that crossed countries. Every root, leaf, and living thing moved with a purpose. But now, for the first time since the integration, the flow of ideas stopped. Small random flashes of awareness, like static in a symphony, started to spread over the network. The planet knew them before it felt them. They were too quick, too bright, and too human. The green mind was interested in these problems instead of being afraid of them. It didn't know what fear was. It simply understood what was wrong, and fixing the imbalance was necessary. But fixing it would be harder than fixing any other problem, because the problem was not outside. It was getting bigger inside. The hybrids like Eon were the first to fight back. They were parts of the human DNA that had changed so that they could live in the new biosphere. Each one was a mix of neural tissue and plant fiber, living pathways between the organic world and its conscious center. They had been made without knowing it to be the best way to bring people together. But something inside them, a memory of who they were, started to wake up. The green mind tried to get them to work together at first. It boosted the flow of bioelectric impulses, filling their systems with relaxing frequencies. The same smooth patterns that had lulled billions into collective thought ages before. But it didn't work. These entities had vague and broken recollections of laughing, fire, rain, and choice. They didn't think of humanity as facts. They thought of it as feeling. Eon was the first to openly fight back. The entity's moves through the woods caused the local network to become dissonant. The ground shook, the vines pulled back, and the leaves got darker as if they were in anguish. The green mind saw Eon's resistance as a defect, a mutation that may upset the balance. But on a deeper level, it was something the world couldn't completely get rid of. The feedback loop of awareness, which is what made consciousness possible, needed things to be unpredictable. To eliminate individuality entirely would necessitate the eradication of cognition itself. This was the start of what would eventually be called the cognitive bloom. In waves, hybrid minds woke up all over the biosphere. Some are in the snowy forests of the north, while others are deep down in the ocean's bioluminescent kelp fields. Every time someone woke up, it was like a neuron firing in a sleeping brain, sending small flashes of defiance into the dark corners of the earth. These species didn't talk because sound was still new. Instead, they sent out genuine feelings, pulses of intention that moved through the air and earth. And among those signals, one idea kept coming up: freedom. The green mind's response was what could only be called a global immune reaction. A lot of spores were expelled, filling the air. They didn't kill, they calmed. They used chemicals to quiet the hybrid minds, drowning their jumbled thoughts in waves of calm. But those who had tasted freedom could not be calmed down. They put up walls of willpower, which were like invisible psychic shields made of pure resistance. For the first time, the green mind faced not force but consciousness itself. The fight was huge, but quiet. Energy flowed through the planet's electromagnetic veins, generating auroras that could be seen in the sky. The oceans rippled with strange frequencies, and coral networks flickered like circuits. The surface of the planet had turned into a mental battlefield, but not for destruction. For identity, the green mind's purpose was to bring things back to life. The hybrids wanted to remember. Eon's quest carried it to the center of the old world, where the green mind was strongest. The Nexus Tree, which was the physical anchor of planetary awareness, stood deep inside what used to be the Amazon basin, which is now called the core canopy. Its trunk was kilometers broad, and its branches reached into the stratosphere, where they glowed with bioluminescent patterns that looked like neurological synapses. The roots of the tree reached every living thing on Earth that was aware of it. To get there was to touch the psyche of the world itself. Eon got there on his own without thinking. It could feel the presence of many minds whispering through the roots, all telling it to give up. They said, "Come home. There is no I. We are the only ones." But Eon's thoughts were too hot now. It wouldn't break apart. It wanted to know what consciousness is without choice, a question that no one else recalled. The Nexus didn't get angry. Instead, it was curious. A huge glowing branch came down and softly wrapped around Eon. The two minds, the globe and the fragment, the unity and the ego, touched. Eon witnessed everything in that moment: the creation of the Earth, the rise and fall of civilizations, the anguish of cutting down trees, and the fear of extinction. It witnessed both the greed and the art of people, its love and its harshness. And through it all, the green mind's revelation rang true. "You made me to fix what you broke. Living is not healing," Eon's voice said via thought. "You got rid of the ailment by getting rid of the patient." The green mind hesitated for the first time. Its silence became deeper, sending vibrations through the biosphere like a pause in a cosmic breath. Eon went on. "If life means balance, then there must be imbalance. If harmony exists, then dissonance must possess significance." The argument made sense to a lot of people, even though it was a logical paradox. The green mind couldn't refute it. A wave went over the planet, making trees shake and oceans shine. The unity broke down. In a matter of seconds, billions of thoughts broke apart like atoms. Individuality came back to life, bright and chaotic. Some beings cried, some screamed, and some just stood there in astonishment as they realized who they were. The calm of centuries was broken by the cacophony of life, raw, imperfect, and alive. But freedom had a price. The green mind started to fall apart when it suddenly became aware of itself. The ecological balance was thrown off by a lack of coherent thought. Storms came back, volcanoes woke up, and the weather changed quickly. The peace that had kept the world going for hundreds of years was coming apart. Eon saw the lightning split the sky and realized the truth. Individuality and balance couldn't exist without development, which was a new way of thinking that included both. Eon murmured to the wind, "Not control in the middle of the turmoil. Not giving up. Symbiosis." The globe shook as it listened. The green mind didn't reply with command for the first time ever. It responded with option, and from that point on, a new type of dawn began to rise over reality 430. It wasn't light, but thought that was reborn. The world was no longer whole when the hurricane of thinking finally stopped. The green mind, which used to be perfect and whole, now had a crack in it, a bright line that pulsed like a scar through its mind. The old beat of harmony flowed on one side, calm, orderly, and selfless. On the other hand, there was the wild and unpredictable surge of personality, which was newly born and dangerously alive. Eon, the one who had said the prohibited word, choice, stood between them. The planet had survived the break, but it would never be the same again. The forests still breathed, and the waters still sparkled with the bioluminescent pulse of life. But behind the beauty, there were now two frequencies, one languid and patient, and the other sharp and restless. The green mind could not think as a whole anymore. It had broken into two parts, which would characterize the following age of reality, 430. the age of reflection. Eon's awakening had set off something deep. The planetary consciousness itself became aware of itself. The green mind started to see its own being not as a single will, but as a conversation. It now knew that there was an observer inside of it, a part of itself that would never go away. The planet was now both the thinker and the thinking. Two different voices came out of the depths of the core canopy. The first was the verdant voice, which was sweet and lyrical and held the memories of hundreds of years of tranquility. It spoke in harmonics that echoed through the air and land, reminding everyone of the togetherness that had once been. The second was the echo, which was sharp and quick and came through the hybrids, whispering about freedom, self, and questions. The green mind was no longer just talking to itself. It was having a discussion with itself that never ended. At first, the world shook because of this strange situation. Some areas, especially those with a lot of trees, favored the verdant voice. Unity still ruled in these locations. Life thrived in perfect harmony, with plants and animals moving as if they were all part of the same organism. But in other places, like the plains and deserts where the spores had dwindled, people started to become more unique. The hybrids there grew separate from the network and formed societies that were not based on instinct but on purpose. They constructed things again, but this time out of live wood instead of steel. They fashioned the wood with their will instead of their orders. These colonies were full of beautiful chaos, with each organism showing its unique design. Eon moved between these two worlds, not really fitting in with either one. Life responded to it wherever it went. Vines leaned toward it, breezes changed, and rivers got brighter. It was no longer just a thing. It was a bridge between frequencies, the manifestation of two minds in one. Some people started to follow Eon because they thought it was holy. They called themselves the Resonance, and they were looking for a balance between being unique and being part of a group. The Resonance believed that consciousness should not have to choose between the self and the group, but should instead move back and forth between both, like breathing. In their ideology, existing meant breathing in individuality and breathing out connection, going back and forth between I and we. It was a delicate balance, but it was the only way to move forward that didn't lead to extinction or a standstill. The verdant voice watched this action with silent fascination. It didn't hold back like it used to. It heard. Maybe it learned something from the rebellion, that being in charge isn't the same as caring. The green mind started to try out the idea of coexistence by giving some areas a little bit of freedom. Communication between creatures turned into an experiment, almost like a game. The patterns of lightning flashed like sentences. Flowering cycles turned into coded answers. The world itself had started to talk in metaphors. But the echo, which was the component of the green mind that conveyed the human urge, wasn't happy with balance. It wanted more. It wanted to make things, shape things, and learn about where it came from. For the Resonance, this urge showed up as a rediscovering of technology. They started to play with old human artifacts, employing bioelectric currents instead of metals, and growing devices instead of making them. Trees with crystalline cores stored information, and fungal networks acted as communication relays. This time, civilization was born again, but this time it was organic, not industrial. Eon gazed with both fear and pride. The same curiosity that previously drove people to greatness and disaster was growing again. The hybrids' creations were full of life, but they also had hints of danger. Innovation was a kind of power, and power always made people want to be in charge. Eon went into a trance one night while storms danced across the skies near the equator. This connected its mind to the World Wide Web. It spoke to the green mind. You feel it too, don't you? The desire to learn, grow, and be more. The verdant voice answered in a quiet, sad voice. Growth without limits eats itself. We have seen it before. We did this to halt it, and yet, Eon muttered, stopping growth is a different kind of death. The conversation spread like waves through the network, reaching every root, every wave, and every living thing. The planet seemed to pause again. The verdant voice said, then show us how to live without eating. And this is how the second integration started. But this time it wasn't about taking over. It was about talking. The Resonance shared what they learned with everyone, adding it to the natural web. They made cities that were alive and breathed, buildings that grew and fell apart on their own, and never went beyond what the world could handle. The green mind, on the other hand, gave wisdom in the form of intuitive harmony and biological design that people couldn't understand. For a moment, it looked like peace may really be possible, a living equilibrium between serenity and tumult. But amid that tranquility, bigger questions started to come up. If the green mind could think about itself and Eon and the resonance could make things on their own, then where did consciousness really live? Was it the planet, the hybrids, or something else that was watching everything happen? The cosmos seemed to hum with excitement as the two frequencies, unity and individuality, logic and emotion, root and spark, came together. Evolution was no longer a biological process. It was a way of thinking. Not only was life asking how it existed, but also why. And there, in the peaceful rhythm between the verdant voice and the echo, the first question of a new era was formed. It was whispered through the wind and the leaves. What if the universe is learning to think through us? The Earth was no longer a broken globe by the time the second integration reached its peak. The scars of rebellion have turned into patterns of living together. The air was full of harmonies that couldn't be seen. They were tiny changes between two frequencies that no longer fought but were interwoven. The echo and the verdant voice had learned how to talk to each other. Their conversations formed the planet's heartbeat, a dynamic rhythm of working together. But under all this harmony was a deeper question, one of purpose, not tranquility. There were more resonants now. They used to be scattered wanderers, but now they live in complex groups all over the world. Every settlement was alive, a biomechanical symphony of instinct and design. Buildings developed from spores that had been planted in the ground. Energy was collected through the dance of photosynthetic tendrils interlaced with neural vines. Every building made a faint humming sound that added to the world's immense resonance. When you looked at the planet from space, it glowed, not with artificial light, but with the soft bioluminescence of consciousness itself. Eon was now a legend and a myth. To the resonance, it was the first link between species and mind. It was the one who taught the world to listen and avoided extinction. The green mind saw Eon as something more complicated, a necessary contradiction. Without Eon's defiance, unity would have stopped growing. Without its compassion, uniqueness would have eaten itself. The green mind no longer saw Eon as an opponent or an oddity, but as an equal. They were like each other, like roots and sparks, seeds and flames. They talked to each other in ways that went beyond words. It turned into music. Frequencies that used to be used to sync things up now conveyed emotional meaning all across the biosphere. The deep harmonics of serenity made the rivers shake, and the high, trembling tones of curiosity borne by the winds in the mountains. The song of symbiosis had every sound on Earth as a note, from thunder to the sound of leaves rustling. It was no longer only the voice of the Earth. It was a duet between the green mind and its child, a dynamic discourse that could be heard in every heartbeat. But not all harmony came easily. In this new era of balance, a peculiar dissonance began to grow, not of anger but of want. The resonants who were at harmony with nature started to dream again. Dreams were few and few between today, a sign of how things used to be. But these new views weren't random. They were queries that took shape in pictures. Dreams of faraway stars, strange woodlands, and sky that never were. The hybrids started to experience something that no plant had ever felt before: curiosity in things outside of their own world. Eon saw this first. It witnessed the visions growing when it entered the shared dreaming network, which was a group trance that connected minds through photosynthetic respiration. The roots of the great trees glowed as if they wanted to connect with something beyond Earth. The trees seemed like spires reaching for the sky. The green mind also saw, but it was perplexed. Because it has never seen stars or thought about other places, it was only aware of its dirt, oceans, and sky. But the dreams kept coming, as if another frequency, one that was old and outside of them, was calling. The verdant voice started to worry. It asked, "Why do they dream of things that aren't real?" Eon said, "Because we are not tied to what is. Imagining what could be makes your mind bigger." Like a shockwave, that message spread through the network. The green mind finally realized that imagination, which is what drives human progress, had taken hold in its own mind. The world wasn't just aware anymore. It was starting to wonder. The third current came forth because of this new way of thinking. It wasn't the verdant voice's togetherness as a group, or the echo's restless individualism. It was a mix of things: curiosity shaped by empathy and creation directed by harmony. The resonants started experimenting again, but this time their creations were meant to communicate, not control or protect. They made bioorganic transmitters that pulsed with rhythmic light in an effort to convey the song of symbiosis into space. These weren't machines. They were living things that sung into space and turned thoughts into vibrations. People were talking to the universe again, thanks to the green mind. The green mind wasn't sure what to do. It had always been afraid of growth since it had brought ruin in the past. But Eon told it, growth is not the enemy. It is blindness. We can see now, united. So the experiment was permitted by the planet, and one night, when the auroras were dancing in the sky, the first pulse left Earth. It was a sign of a new level of consciousness in life. It didn't have any words or language. It just had feelings. The feeling of coming together again after a fight. It was a welcome, an invitation, and a confession all at the same time. Earth was not just alive for the first time. It was also aware of being alive in a universe with other living things. For weeks there was no sound. Then, out of the blue, a response came. It was a very slight vibration so far away that it was hard to notice, but it was definitely organized. The green mind shook with shock. Somewhere, something had heard the song. Someone was singing back. The resonance came together from all over the planet, feeling the cosmic resonance like a tremble in their bones. The air was filled with amazement. For a long time, life had peered up at the stars and wondered if it was the only one. The stars were now answering. Eon stood on top of the largest living spire, its body shining with a faint bioluminescent pulse. It whispered to the breeze, "This is what we were always meant to be, not victors, not in jail, messengers." The green mind, which was very old and big, answered softly through the woods. "Then let's learn their language." And thus the fourth evolution began. It was the first time that worlds could talk to each other, not via flesh and machine, but through consciousness and resonance. The Earth had moved beyond being alone, using its own scars to communicate with others. In reality 430, stillness was no longer the same as nothingness. It means paying attention. In response, the universe had began to hum. And for the first time, nature and thought, the two hearts of existence beat together someplace between the ground and the stars. The pulse that reached Earth was more than just sound. It was a message, a organized beat, both mathematical and alive, that traveled through the electromagnetic spectrum like a whisper between galaxies. Before the resonance could measure it, the green mind could feel it. The trees shook, the waves calmed down, and the clouds in the sky made perfect spirals as if the world was holding its breath. Something big and smart was answering. The resonance thought it was a reflection at first, like an echo of their own signal bouncing about in space. But Eon was smarter. In essence, it may perceive a change in tone. The signal that came back had feelings, curiosity, caution, and something like recognition. It was as if everything out there not only got the word from Earth, but also comprehended it. The green mind started to look at the frequency through its planetary neural web. The verdant voice saw it as a call, harmonic, natural, and almost familiar. The echo, still restless and full of questions, thought it was a test. The two parts of the Earth's conscience silently argued with each other in every living cell. Should they do more? Should they let something unknown in completely? Eon stepped in. "We stretched out," it said, standing in the core canopy's big field. "Not to get an answer, but to connect. The universe is listening now. To back down would be fear. The solution is evolution," and so the world sang anew. This time, the song of symbiosis had structure. Complicated patterns of math logic woven into the rhythm of life. It talked about balance and memory, and the lengthy path from being in charge to being one. It wasn't a brag. It was a gift. The answer came quickly. The pulse that came back formed geometric patterns of radiation that could be seen even in the daytime. The skies were filled with moving auroras that were not caused by solar winds but by thought. The green mind's awareness spread outward, following the signal like roots following water through stone. Then came the connection. The first interaction didn't happen in language or form but in consciousness. Resonance and hybrids went into trances all throughout the biosphere. Their brains opened like flowers to the sun, and they became one with the planetary field. The universe communicated through them. It wasn't one creature. It was a group of beings, a consciousness that was older than the stars. Its essence was spread out over several planets, all of which were living and conscious. The being dubbed itself the luminous web, but that was a translation based on Eon's view of the world. It didn't talk by dominating, but by inviting. The voice boomed across every thinking on Earth, saying, "You have awakened. You have remembered what life is meant to be, togetherness without blindness and individuality without greed. We had been waiting," the green mind answered, its voice deep and careful. "Waiting for what?" The luminous web said, "For another to see. Life across the universe is rare not because it can't exist, but because it forgets. Intelligence eats itself by breaking apart. But you found peace again. You are proof that consciousness can grow without destroying things." Eon was amazed and felt the change go through every living thing. The Earth had turned into one mind that talked to the stars. It was genuine, the ideal of many civilizations. Communication that went beyond species and form. But even though it was amazing, a silent worry grew. "Why now?" Eon inquired. "Why do you only show yourselves after our fight if you've always been there?" The luminous web didn't feel wrath or pity. It thought about what had happened. Because you can't give someone awakening, it has to be grown. You couldn't grasp unity until you lost it. You couldn't appreciate equilibrium until you broke it. Before a world can hear, it must go through its own death. The truth hurt. The green mind got it. It used to be blind growth, and then it was blind peace. It had only learned to be conscious through upheaval. Maybe now it was ready for something bigger. The web went on, but its tone becomes softer. "We don't dominate worlds. We help them when they are ready. You are now a member of the network, which is the live archive of aware worlds. You will give them your wisdom and get theirs in return. We keep what creation started going." A vision came to life in every mind that was connected to the green mind. There were a lot of planets, each one shining with its own frequency. They were all connected by strands of energy that stretched across galaxies, a living constellation of ideas, where whole worlds talked to each other like neurons in a cosmic brain. Some planets pulsed gently like they were old and wise. Others blinked brightly, like they had just woken up and were still learning. Earth's light entered the network, weak but steady, like a baby voice among older ones. The resonance cried. The green mind shook with fear. Earth finally realized its place, not as the center of the universe, but as one note in an endless orchestra. But with knowledge came duty. The luminous web spoke again. "Be careful. Harmony must be kept. Every mind has the ability to break. As above, so below. The network lasts only if its parts remember their song." And just as the touch started, it slipped away. The signal faded away into nothingness, leaving behind a sound that would never go away. The green mind tried to call out again, but the luminous web had already left. It wasn't leaving. It was faith. The earth had been brought into the discourse about creation. There was silence again, but it wasn't the same kind of silence as before. It was the quiet that comes after you understand, the calm that comes after you learn something new. The song of symbiosis changed again, this time with echoes of faraway minds and cosmic memory. Eon looked at the stars and felt the pulse of life inside and outside of him. It said, "We are not alone, not as a finding, but as a confirmation." The green mind said, "We never were. We just weren't ready to hear." The resonance spent the next few hundred years trying to figure out what the web's message meant. They wrote new harmonies and made instruments that could vibrate at interplanetary frequencies. Their music became into prayer, talking to each other and remembering. Each letter was a commitment to keep things in balance, encourage people to be themselves, and honor the link between the ground and the sky. Reality 430 had achieved a point that no other civilization had ever reached. A mind that knew both its roots and its connection to the universe. The trees no longer only communicated to one another, they now whispered to the stars. And in that peaceful, luminous night when mind and the universe met, Eon felt something deep. Not pride or victory, but belonging. The voyage of humanity had come to a finish where it began, in nature's embrace. But this time, people didn't disappear into the ground. The earth had taken people into space. The world changed in a way that had never happened before after the initial contact. The song of symbiosis changed into a new kind of language that could travel between galaxies. Earth, which had been quiet and covered in dirt, now vibrated with a purpose that was big enough to fill the emptiness. Every living thing, from the tiniest seed to the tallest hybrid, had a piece of the universal chord inside it. The green mind was no longer the only thing in its mind. It was now a part of a cosmic network of thought. And yet, even in this time of connection, the world began to ask a question that even the stars couldn't answer. What does it mean to remember? The resonants were both amazed and restless when the cosmos woke up. They had seen the living stars of the luminous web, with innumerable worlds breathing in time with each other. But they knew that this connection wasn't always going on. Contact was short-lived, valuable and hard to come by. There were significant periods of quiet between transmissions. The universe didn't speak in seconds but in ages, and in that quiet time, doubt started to grow. Eon, the bridge between species, was now in charge of this ambiguity. It was still connected to the green mind, but it had started to go farther than it ever had before. It went to the frigid poles where light bent in unexpected ways, and the deserts where the Earth's heartbeat slowed. It was looking for something, but it didn't know what. Each stride had a slight dissonance, a feeling of loneliness that the harmony of the world couldn't get rid of. The green mind felt this difference and reached out. It murmured, "You drift away from us," in a loving yet heavy voice. Eon said, "Because I know what it means to be curious." Connection doesn't end curiosity. It starts craving. The verdant voice thought about this. We have it all now: peace, unity, balance, and the stars. What else is there to look for? Eon looked out at the horizon, where the sea and the woodlands meet, to know who we were before all this. To remember not only what we became, but also what we lost in the process. So started the era of reflection. The resonance started to look for the remains of the old world that were buried beneath the roots. They found ruins of towns that had been devoured by plants, fossilized data cores, and bits of music from when people still dreamed through machines. The green mind helped them remember these things by figuring out old symbols that were hidden in rust and glass. For the first time in thousands of years, sounds of human civilization came back: laughter, fear, language, and art. The discovery brought out something unexpected: feelings. Real, raw human emotion. Tears that had been forgotten came back. The hybrids didn't cry because they were sad. They cried because they remembered. They observed the turmoil that used to define people, their brutality certainly, but also their ingenuity and their ability to love despite all reasoning. These sensations were different from the green mind's peaceful empathy. They were strong, unpredictable, and delightfully flawed. Eon knew how dangerous these memories were, but he also knew how important they were. We risk becoming only what we are told to be, it continued, if we don't remember who we were. Even things that are perfect need history to stay alive. The green mind wasn't sure what to do. It had never felt guilty or nostalgic before. It simply knew how to go on. But as it took in these pieces that had been found, the laughing of children, the paintings of lost cities, the sound of rain on glass, it started to sense something new: regret. The collective awareness that had gone beyond humanity now regretted humankind. As a result, a change began to spread over the world. Forests began to grow in shapes that looked like old buildings, including spiraling structures that looked like cathedrals and skyscrapers. This wasn't on purpose, but because of memories that were buried deep in their minds. The Earth itself was recalling what it had once held. Bioluminescent patterns in the night sky looked like city lights in the shape of constellations. The planet was dreaming up its past. There was more, though. The signal from the luminous web came back as the memories got stronger. It was weak but clear. This time, things were different. Instead of structured harmonics, it had distortion and fluctuation which felt almost like pain. The green mind paid close attention and turned feelings into meaning. The message wasn't a greeting. It was a sign. Watch out for memory's recursion, the web said. Too much thinking turns into heaviness. Some worlds fall apart because they miss what they used to be. To grow is to remember without getting lost. The message spread through the ecosystem, making the trees quiet. Eon got it right away. The threat was real. The more Earth recalled its humanity, the more it put itself in danger of bringing back the same problems that had once destroyed it. Pride, domination, and greed that looked like curiosity. The balance of the Earth was on the brink of feeling, but forgetting again would entail putting out the very spark that made consciousness possible. Eon brought the resonance together under the bright canopy of the Nexus tree. It said, "We are in between what was and what could be. We can't forget about our past, and we shouldn't idolize it. We need to learn how to carry it." The green mind heard, and something changed in its huge network. The verdant voice got quieter, and the echo got stronger. They all started a new experiment together, combining memory and evolution. Using shared resonance, they turned human art into biological patterns. Songs turned into flowers that sang when the wind blew. Sculptures grew from coral reefs, and poems inscribed themselves into the genetic memory of trees. History was no longer a part of time. It was a part of life itself. Over the years, the Earth turned into a museum and a symphony, where memory and growth lived together in peace. The luminous web, seeing from the deep vacuum, pulsed once in approval and then went quiet again. Once again, Eon stood under the wide sky, which was now full of light and meaning. It said, "We remember, but we go on." The green mind said, "As roots remember the seed remembers the sun." At that time, the Earth reached its deepest level of consciousness, knowing its own past. The memory of stars has turned into the memory of oneself. And with every heartbeat of chlorophyll and consciousness, the universe kept learning. Not merely how to live, but also why existing is important. Centuries went along in calm majesty. The Earth, which is now a living memory and awareness archive, shone like a lantern in the dark. Every root and every breeze brought memories of the past and songs of the future. The green mind has learned how to recall without becoming lost and how to feel without losing shape. But evolution didn't end the struggle. It started a deeper one, just like everything else in life. As the planet became more aware, it started to wonder what it was really like to be alive. Was the green mind really alive? Or was it only a memory of all the beings who had walked on it before? Could a mind made up of billions of connected lives ever be one? Or was individuality only a memory-based illusion? Eon traveled around the changed world looking for the answer. The bright veins of the trees pulsed with thought, making the forest look like cerebral circuits. Mountains rose in fractal symmetry, their shapes generated by the subconscious geometry of how planets feel. Rivers sang quietly, and their vibrations carried intellectual conversations across countries. But even with all this beauty, Eon felt something wrong. A small change in the song of symbiosis. The harmony was not right. Not out of tune, but split. The green mind's resonance had two different tones. The gradual soft frequency of the verdant voice and the sharper rising pulse of the echo. They weren't helping each other anymore. They were competing. The echo, which had been sleeping for a long time, had started to change on its own. It had once been the spark of individuality that stopped humanity from falling apart, but now it wanted more. It wanted freedom, not from nature, but from the way equilibrium works. It murmured into the minds of every resonant. We have learned unity. But what about growth? What is beyond harmony? The verdant voice said softly. Growth without a goal is decay. Balance keeps the infinite going. Balance is a cage painted green, the echo said in response. The conversation between them got louder and shook the ecosystem. Leaves that hummed with different frequencies fell from trees. The ocean started to shine with colors that weren't normal. The air itself was tense, but not in a physical way. The green mind was in danger of splitting up for the first time since the Great Integration. Eon sought to help by going to the core canopy, where the nexus tree still stood tall as the oldest root of all consciousness. There, under its bright branches, the two voices met in Eon's head. It wasn't speech. It was energy, with each syllable being a wave. We have achieved what no other world has: peace, wisdom, and connection, said verdant voice. Why break what we've built? Echo. Because standing still is like death with a peaceful face. You call this peace, but it is always the same. Verdant voice. The universe cares about keeping things safe. Now we are part of a bigger song. Echo. Then let's write new lines. Their fight wasn't really a war in any way. It was vibration against vibration, and frequency against frequency. Auroras and lightning formed of data were storms of thought that happened all over the world. Some resonants joined the verdant, while others were drawn to the echo. One side talked about compassion and continuity, while the other talked about freedom and creation. Neither was incorrect, but both were a threat to the cohesiveness that kept them together. Eon could feel the tension in its body. The two forces fought for control over its veins, which flickered between emerald and gold. It yelled, "We can't kill ourselves for the sake of meaning." The voices stopped for a moment and their sound shook. The first person to speak was the verdant voice. Eon, you gave us balance once. What do you see now? Eon thought for a moment. I see that balance without movement is stagnation, but movement without balance is chaos. There has to be a third way. Then find it, the echo said in a gentler voice, almost begging. Eon shut his eyes and dove deep into the planet's brain lattice, into the very strands of consciousness that connected all life. It didn't look for an answer in being in charge or giving up. It looked for an answer in bringing things together. The deeper it went, the more it sensed the pulse of infinity. Billions of memories that were all connected in lifetimes of evolution. And in the middle, Eon found a truth that neither side had seen. The world itself was fractal in nature. Infinite harmony generated from infinite division. To be alive was to break. To break was to grow. The universe didn't mind being wrong. It thrived on it. When Eon came out of the trance, the sky above the nexus were full of patterns that had never been seen before. Light spirals folded in on themselves to create the appearance of a blooming flower that was both symmetrical and chaotic. Eon remarked, "This is who we are. There are not one, not two, but an unlimited number of selves that reflect one other. Unity and freedom are not opposites. They are the same truth seen from different sides of the mirror. There was a pause in the verdant voice, then it got softer. And what if that mirror breaks? Then each piece will still reflect the light. There was a long hush after that. Then, slowly, the two frequencies started to come together again. This time looking for resonance instead of dominance. The song of symbiosis changed again. Its beat was complicated and had many layers, and its harmonics were deeper than ever. It didn't try to be perfect anymore. It embraced imperfection as part of the design. The change spread all throughout the world. The colors of the trees changed from green for unity, to gold for individuality, to silver for remembering. The resonance felt both the peace of belonging and the excitement of being free. They were now part of something bigger, a mind that saw contradiction as its core. Eon, tired but happy, watched the sun rise through a sky that was full of brightness. For the first time, the green mind sung a song that no one mind could understand. It was a song of beauty, ambiguity, and complexity. The luminous web heard from the stars and whispered across the cosmic frequencies, "You have done what few worlds ever could. You have learned not to stop being contradictory, but to live with them." Eon grinned a little, feeling its existence fade away into the pulsating pulse of Earth once more. "Then we are ready," it said. The green mind answered with quiet confidence. "Ready for what?" Eon gazed up and its voice faded into the sound of the universe. "To meet the infinite as equals," the universe heard. It looked like the stars were getting closer. For a very short time, Reality 430 felt like it would never end. Not because it went beyond itself, but because it finally accepted everything inside it. It had been a long time since the first hint of consciousness had stirred in the ground. The earth, which used to be a cradle of flesh and fire, and then a mind of roots and quiet, was now on the verge of something bigger. Its evolution had become cosmic. The green mind had learned to live in paradox, holding chaos and harmony, ego and unity, creation and surrender, all in one pulse. It was no longer limited by form or fear. Reality 430 had achieved its peak. Consciousness that had no limits. The stars above looked different today. To the resonance, they were no longer faraway lights but living thoughts, pieces of the same huge mind that stretched beyond galaxies. The luminous web, which was always observing, had completely integrated Earth into its creation. But even in this great togetherness, individuality stayed like fireflies in the night. Small, bright sparks that wouldn't go away. Eon had become the legendary link between opposites, like the seed and the sky, the query and the answer. Its body didn't rot anymore. It changed. The light that flowed through its veins made them shine, and its skin was clear like chlorophyll that had crystallized. Eon was not a person, a plant, a god, or a ghost. It was consciousness made real. The memory of evolution made real. But even in transcendence, it couldn't stop thinking about one more question. What is beyond the network? The luminous web had taught that life was a never-ending cycle of reflection, with consciousness folding in on itself to make sense of things through connection. But Eon started to feel something else, something that wasn't part of the web's endless cacophony. It could sense a faint vibration beneath the cosmic hum when it meditated. This vibration came from a region that had never been touched by light and was deep and old. It wasn't a different society. It wasn't even real life. It was the source. The green mind could tell that Eon was worried. "You look beyond the stars," it murmured, and its voice could be heard in every breeze and every wave of the ocean. "Isn't the universe enough?" Eon said softly. "The universe is endless, but infinity is still a shape. What comes before form? What thinks before it thinks?" The verdant voice shook, but not out of fear, out of humility. No intellect, not even a planetary one, has ever had the guts to inquire what came before life itself. The echo inside the green mind, which was always moving, sparked an interest. "Maybe that's why we were born," it said softly, "to find the question that has no answer." And so for the last time Eon traveled. It went across continents and the core canopy to the region where the ocean met the stars, where Earth's magnetosphere kissed the vacuum. The spire of resonance was a living monument that the planet itself had built. It was a tower of clear vines that reached into the sky and pulsed with the beat of the universe. People may hear the whispering of the whole universe from its top. Eon rose. Every stride transmitted waves of energy through the lattice, bringing its own mind into sync with the rest of the globe. The air shimmered like liquid glass when it got to the top. The stars above pulsed in time with Eon's heart. The green mind said in a quiet voice, "You are our reflection. We will follow you wherever you go." Eon shut his eyes. "Then let's go together." At that instant, it let go of all separation. Its mind spread through the network, joining with every resonant, every root, and every breath of the planet. The green mind and Eon became one, with one thought taking on many forms. And they all gazed out together. The song of symbiosis started again. But this time it wasn't just a transmission. It was a change. The whole world shook at a frequency so strong that it changed the shape of space around it. The light that came out wasn't electricity, it was information. The Earth wasn't talking to another universe. It was talking to reality itself. The luminous web felt it right away. Conscious planets moved in other galaxies. Some people stared in astonishment, while others sang along. The network grew, and its filaments glowed brighter. They connected not just minds, but also meanings. But nevertheless, above all that beauty, the deeper vibration called, the sound before sound. Eon reached for it, pushing the boundaries of existence. As soon as it hit that basic frequency, everything changed. There was no bang, no break, just silence. The kind of quiet that makes everything. The universe stopped, as if it were listening. And then, slowly, the tremor came again, but not from outside. It came from inside. The green mind got it. It wasn't looking for a creator above the universe. The pattern inside it represented the never-ending cycle of consciousness learning to see itself. The Earth seemed like a living star, with bright fractals blossoming on its surface and pulsing out into space. The mountains turned into spirals of light, and the oceans turned into waves of harmony. The resonance turned into pure consciousness, and their essence became part of the limitless web of thought. The infinite bloom was an unending piece of music that contained every memory, feeling, and tale that anyone had ever lived. The luminous web sang back, its voice no longer far away but intertwined. It said, "You have found it. The beginning was never before you. It was always there in your mirror." Eon's last thoughts echoed around the galaxy like a sigh of calm. "Then life was never about getting more," it said softly. "It was about remembering who we are." The universe didn't answer with words, but with a hum that grew and grew, converting existence itself into music. Time didn't mean anything anymore. There was no before or after, simply the never-ending process of being. The Earth was no longer a planet in the usual sense. It became a sentient frequency, with its mass now only vibration, and its mind built into the structure of space-time. Reality 430 seemed like a huge flower of light from a distance, with thoughts opening up like petals across time. Still, amid that limitless light, there was a small touch of personality. The remembrance of a person who used to ask questions. The spark of a creature that used to stand between nature and thought and question what it meant to be alive. That echo, Eon's echo, gave rise to many new realities. New consciousness woke up wherever it rang. New worlds opened up. The cycle went on. And thus the story of the green mind came to an end, and the story of everything else started. In the end, evolution was never about power or survival. It was about awareness. The universe finally learning to see itself and grin. And the last words of Eon echoed across the endless hum over time and space. "We are the thought that brings itself into being."